I had seen many courtroom battles before. Over the years, I had watched powerful executives lose everything. I had watched ordinary people stand up against impossible odds. I had listened to thousands of stories, thousands of excuses, thousands of explanations. But I had never seen a billionaire become afraid of his own daughter. The courtroom was unusually crowded that morning. Reporters filled the back rows. Cameras waited outside the building. Every seat was occupied. Even people with no connection to the case had arrived early, hoping to witness what many were already calling the trial of the year. At the center of it all sat Ethan Blackwell, confident, composed, perfectly dressed. The 60-year-old technology billionaire looked exactly like the man the public had spent years admiring. His attorneys surrounded him like a protective wall. Some of the most expensive legal minds money could buy sat at his table. Thick binders covered their desks. Laptops remained open. Assistants moved quietly behind them. Everything about Ethan Blackwell projected control successes. Power, the kind of power most people spend their entire lives chasing but never reach. Several feet away sat his daughter, Emma Blackwell, 27 years old, quiet, motionless. Her hands rested in her lap while her eyes remained fixed on the floor. She wasn't speaking to anyone. She wasn't looking at reporters. She wasn't looking at the audience. And yet somehow she was the most important person in the room. At least she would become the most important person in the room. At that moment, nobody knew why she was there. Officially, she wasn't a defendant. She wasn't a plaintiff. She wasn't even scheduled to testify. To most observers, she appeared to be nothing more than a supportive daughter attending her father's trial. But there was something unusual happening. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced toward her. Not long. Not enough for most people to notice. Just brief looks, quick checks, as if he needed reassurance, as if he needed confirmation that she was still on his side. At the time, I didn't fully understand those looks. Later, they would make perfect sense because Ethan Blackwell believed his daughter would protect him. And for most of her life, the story of Ethan Blackwell was the kind journalists loved writing about. Born into a middle-class family, no wealthy parents, no powerful connections, no inherited fortune. At least that was the version most people knew. According to public records, Ethan started his first software company from a tiny apartment shortly after college. He worked impossible hours. He slept beside computers. He sacrificed relationships. He sacrificed comfort. And eventually, he succeeded. The company exploded. Investors arrived. The business expanded. One company became 3. 3 became 10. Within 2 decades, Ethan Blackwell had transformed himself into one of the most recognizable names in American technology. Magazines called him visionary. Business networks called him a genius. Universities invited him to speak. Young entrepreneurs worshipped him. Millions followed his advice online. People loved stories about self-made billionaires. Ethan understood that better than anyone. But it wasn't just his business success that made people admire him. It was his image. He donated millions to hospitals, millions to schools, millions to charities. Whenever natural disasters struck, Ethan Blackwell's name seemed to appear on donation lists before anyone else's. News articles described him as compassionate, generous, inspiring. He became more than a businessman. He became a symbol, the kind of person people pointed to when they wanted proof that success and kindness could exist together. And perhaps no one admired him more than his daughter. Emma Blackwell had grown up watching her father become a legend. She remembered the tiny apartment stories. She remembered the long nights. She remembered hearing relatives talk about his determination. To her, Ethan wasn't just a billionaire. He was Dad, the man who taught her how to ride a bicycle, the man who attended every school recital, the man who stayed up helping her study for exams, the man who somehow managed to answer business calls while still making time for family dinners. Photographs of the two appeared constantly in magazines. Award ceremonies, charity events, holiday celebrations, company conferences. The public loved them. They looked inseparable, and in many ways they were. After graduating from college, Emma joined her father's company. Many assumed it was favoritism. The reality was different. Employees respected her. She worked hard, learned quickly, asked questions, stayed late. She wasn't trying to become famous. She simply wanted to make her father proud. Ethan trusted her more than almost anyone. Over time, she gained access to meetings, reports, projects, and conversations unavailable to most employees. She became one of the few people allowed behind the curtain, one of the few people allowed to see how the empire actually operated. For years, nothing seemed unusual. Then Sarah Mitchell died. The case should have ended there, at least according to the company. Sarah was 34 years old, a single mother, 2 children. She worked for a construction contractor involved in one of Blackwell Technologies' massive development projects on a rainy Tuesday morning. An accident occurred at the site. Equipment malfunctioned. Safety systems failed. Within minutes, Sarah was dead. The news devastated her family. Friends described her as hard-working, dedicated. The kind of person who carried everyone else's burdens while ignoring her own. Her children were only 8 and 11. Suddenly, they had no mother. Public sympathy arrived immediately. People donated money. Local news stations covered the tragedy. Social media filled with messages of support. At first, Blackwell Technologies responded exactly as expected. Public statements, condolences, promises of cooperation, internal investigations. Corporate representatives insisted the accident was unavoidable, a tragic situation. Nothing more. Most people accepted that explanation. Accidents happen. Construction work carries risks. Life moves forward, or at least it usually does. A few weeks later, strange things began happening. A witness changed his statement, then another. A safety report vanished. Then another tunnel documents became difficult to locate. Employees who once spoke openly suddenly became nervous whenever questions arose. Several workers reportedly refused interviews. Others stopped returning phone calls entirely. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger everything became. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just enough to create an uncomfortable feeling. A feeling that something wasn't right. A feeling that somebody knew more than they were saying. Inside the company, rumors quietly spread. Nobody spoke publicly. Nobody made accusations. But whispers began traveling through hallways, through offices, through private conversations. Emma heard some of those whispers. At first, she ignored them. People gossip in every company. People speculate. People invent stories. She trusted her father. Why wouldn't she? He had spent 27 years earning that trust. Then one evening, everything changed. It happened by accident. Most life-changing discoveries do. Emma had stayed late at the office reviewing documents for an upcoming project. Her father was attending a board meeting several floors above. As she finished her work, she realized she had accidentally taken the wrong tablet from a conference room. It belonged to Ethan. Normally, she would have returned it immediately. Instead, a notification appeared on the screen. Just a single message. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing dramatic. At least not at first glance. The screen illuminated. Emma's eyes drifted toward it. And for a brief moment, curiosity overcame habit. The message itself wasn't long. In fact, it contained only a handful of words. Yet those few words carried enough weight to shatter years of certainty, enough weight to make her question everything she believed she knew, enough weight to transform admiration into doubt, enough weight to begin a chain of events that would eventually lead all of them into that courtroom. The moment Emma read that message, she stopped seeing her father the same way. For the next several days, Emma convinced herself there had to be an explanation. There had to be. The alternative was impossible. People didn't spend decades being one person and suddenly become someone else overnight. Not fathers. Not the kind of father Ethan Blackwell had always been. Not the man who sat beside her hospital bed when she broke her arm at 10 years old. Not the man who drove 6 hours through a snowstorm just to attend one of her college presentations. Not the man who always told her that reputation was built on honesty, so she did what most people would do. She rationalized. Maybe the message was taken out of context. Maybe she had misunderstood it. Maybe there was information she didn't have. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation waiting somewhere beyond her current understanding. Every time doubt entered her mind, she pushed it away. Every time suspicion appeared, she replaced it with trust. After all, this wasn't some stranger. This was her father, the man she had admired her entire life. But something had changed. And once doubt enters a person's mind, it rarely leaves quietly. The following week, Emma found herself paying attention to details she previously ignored. Conversations, meetings, dat kind of expectations, small things. The kind of things people overlook when they trust someone completely. The kind of things they notice once trust begins to crack. One afternoon, while reviewing internal project records, she noticed a chain of communications connected to the investigation into Sarah Mitchell's death. Nothing immediately alarming, nothing dramatic. Just enough to make her stop scrolling. She read the messages twice. Then a third time, the language was strangely vague, strangely careful. One message simply read, "Handle it." No context, no explanation, no details, just 2 words, "Handle it." Emma stared at the screen. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps it meant everything. She couldn't tell. A few days later, she found another message. This one was buried inside a long email chain involving executives and legal advisors. Most of the conversation discussed routine corporate matters. Then one sentence appeared. "Don't put that in writing." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. Again, the message could mean many things. Companies receive legal advice constantly. Executives are often told to avoid careless documentation. There was nothing inherently suspicious about it, yet something felt wrong. She couldn't explain why. It was the pattern, the accumulation. One strange message might be coincidence. Several begin to tell a story. Over the next month, more fragments emerged, more pieces. Never enough to reveal the full picture. Never enough to prove anything. Just enough to keep her awake at night. Delay the report. Wait until legal reviews it. Keep discussions internal. Make sure this goes away. That last one bothered her the most. Make sure this goes away. What exactly was supposed to go away? The investigation? The attention? The questions, or something else entirely? Emma desperately wanted certainty. Instead, she found ambiguity. And ambiguity can be torture because it forces people to choose what they believe before they know the truth. Every discovery made her more uncomfortable. Every discovery created more questions, yet none of them provided answers, at least not answers she could prove. Soon, her behavior began to change. She spoke less. Laughed less, smiled less. People noticed, most importantly, Ethan noticed. Parents often recognized changes in their children long before anyone else. One evening, Ethan invited Emma to dinner. Just the 2 of them. No executives, no assistants, no reporters, no business discussions. At least that was the official plan. The restaurant overlooked the city skyline, a place they had visited many times throughout the years. The staff knew them by name. The owner personally greeted them. Everything felt familiar, and yet nothing felt familiar. Emma barely touched her food. Ethan noticed immediately. "You seem distracted." She forced a smile. "I'm fine." He studied her face. Parents have a remarkable ability to detect lies, especially from their children. "Something's bothering you." "No, Emma." His voice softened. The same voice she had heard since childhood. the same reassuring tone that once made every problem seem smaller. For a brief moment, she almost told him everything, the messages, the doubts, the fear, all of it. Instead, she remained silent. And that realization frightened her more than anything she had discovered. The silence stretched. Ethan continued watching her, waiting. Eventually, she nodded. Yes. The answer came out automatically, a reflex, a habit, a lie. Inside, she felt terrified, not because she feared her father, because she feared the possibility that she no longer knew him. The dinner ended shortly afterward. Neither mentioned the question again. Neither needed to. Both understood it would remain hanging between them long after they left. Meanwhile, outside their family, the situation continued growing worse. Sarah Mitchell's family officially filed a lawsuit. The case immediately attracted media attention. News organizations covered every development. Commentators debated responsibility. Experts appeared on television discussing corporate accountability. Public pressure increased daily. And for the first time, Ethan Blackwell's carefully crafted reputation began showing signs of strain. The company fought back aggressively, very aggressively. Elite attorneys were hired. Investigators were hired. Public relations specialists were hired. Millions of dollars flowed into the defense effort. Witnesses found themselves under intense scrutiny. Every statement was challenged. Every inconsistency was highlighted. Every weakness was exposed. Some witnesses became nervous. Others changed their stories. A few stopped cooperating altogether. The atmosphere surrounding the case became increasingly hostile. The stakes kept growing, and Emma found herself trapped in the middle. On one side stood her father, the man who had spent decades building an empire. On the other side stood a grieving family searching for answers. Each new headline increased the pressure. Each court filing intensified the conflict. Each passing week made silence harder. And then came the night that changed everything. It was nearly midnight. Emma was alone in her apartment. The city outside had gone quiet. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Selim refused to come. Her phone rested beside her on the couch. The screen suddenly lit up. A new message. From Ethan. She stared at his name. For several seconds, she didn't open it. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Instinct. Fear. Dread. Something she couldn't quite identify. Finally, she unlocked the phone, read the message, and froze. There were only 2 words. 2 simple words. No greeting. No explanation. No context. Just an instruction. A command. A warning. Delete everything. And in that moment, every doubt she had been fighting suddenly became impossible to ignore. After receiving the message, Emma didn't sleep. She tried. She turned off the lights. She closed her eyes. She lay motionless in bed for hours. But every time she drifted toward sleep, those 2 words returned. Everything. Again. And again. And again. The message didn't prove everything, but it changed everything. Because innocent people don't usually ask others to destroy information. Innocent people don't send messages that sound like orders moments before a major trial. For the first time in her life, Emma found herself afraid of her own thoughts. Not because she knew the truth, because she didn't. And uncertainty can sometimes feel heavier than certainty. The next morning, she ignored 3 calls from her father. By lunchtime, there were 6. By evening, there were 12. She stared at the screen every time his name appeared. Part of her wanted to answer. Part of her wanted to hear him explain everything. Part of her wanted to believe there was still a version of this story that didn't end in disaster. Eventually, she picked up. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan's voice appeared, calm, controlled. The same voice he used during investor meetings. The same voice he used whenever he wanted people to feel safe. Emma. She remained silent. I've been trying to reach you. Still silence. Then he sighed. A tired sigh, not angry, not frustrated, just exhausted. I know what you're thinking. Emma's heart started racing. What am I thinking? Another pause, longer this time. You're making assumptions. His answer sounded prepared, almost rehearsed, as though he had practiced it before calling. Things aren't always what they seem. Emma stared through the apartment window into the darkness outside. Then tell me what they are. For a brief moment, she thought he might. She thought perhaps this was the conversation, the explanation. The truth. Instead, he said something else. Trust me. The call ended 10 minutes later. She learned nothing, and somehow felt worse. The following week became a nightmare, not because of evidence, not because of lawyers, because of people. People started appearing everywhere. Family members, old friends, business associates. Individuals she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted coffee meetings, lunch meetings, private conversations. Every discussion seemed to arrive at the same destination. Protect the family. Protect the company. Protect your father. Nobody said those exact words at first. They disguised them, wrapped them in concern, wrapped them in love, wrapped them in loyalty. But the message remained the same. One afternoon, her mother arrived unexpectedly. Emma opened the apartment door and immediately knew why she was there. Her mother's eyes were red. She looked exhausted, older than she had just a few weeks earlier. Without saying a word, she walked inside. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then her mother finally looked at her. Your father loves you. Emma felt tears building immediately. I know. He always has. I know. He's not a bad man. The words hung in the room because that was the question neither wanted to ask. Not directly. Not yet. Her mother reached across the table and grabbed her hand. The gesture felt familiar. Comforting, painful, all at once. Families survive difficult moments. Emma looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. What if this isn't a difficult moment? Her mother didn't answer, because sometimes silence is an answer. A week later, one of the company's senior executives requested a private meeting. Officially, it wasn't about the trial. Unofficially, it was entirely about the trial. The executive spoke carefully. Every sentence sounded polished. Every word sounded strategic. The company has thousands of employees. Emma remained silent. Families depend on this business. Still silent. Investors depend on stability. More silence. Then came the sentence she would remember forever. Sometimes doing the right thing requires protecting something larger than yourself. Emma almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was terrifying. People often justify terrible decisions by convincing themselves they're serving a greater good. History is filled with examples. Entire disasters built upon that exact logic. Protect something larger. Protect something bigger. Protect something important. And somehow the truth always becomes the first sacrifice. As pressure increased, Emma started falling apart. Quickly, privately, the way many people do. She stopped answering messages, stopped attending social events, stopped sleeping. Coffee became breakfast. Coffee became lunch. Coffee became dinner. Several nights she found herself sitting alone on her apartment floor at 3 a.m, unable to think, unable to stop thinking. Both at the same time, she would stare at the evidence, then close her laptop, then reopen it, then close it again. The cycle repeated endlessly. Every possibility seemed terrible. Every choice felt wrong. One night she experienced her first panic attack. At first she thought she was having a heart attack. Her chest tightened. Her breathing became shallow. The room felt smaller. The walls felt closer. For several terrifying minutes, she genuinely believed she might die. Eventually, it passed. But the fear remained. Fear of losing her father. Fear of losing her family. Fear of losing herself. Because regardless of what happened next, the life she had always known was disappearing. The hardest moments weren't spent reviewing evidence. The hardest moments involved Sarah Mitchell's children. Emma couldn't stop thinking about them. 2 children. One mother, gone forever. Sometimes she would look at their photographs online, a birthday party, a school event, a family picnic. Ordinary moments. The kind people rarely appreciate until they're gone. And every time she saw those images, one question returned. What happens to them if I stay silent? The question refused to leave. It followed her everywhere. Into meetings, into elevators, into restaurants, into dreams. What happens if I stay silent? Eventually, the answer became impossible to avoid. If she stayed silent, her family might remain intact. Her inheritance might remain intact. Her relationship with her father might remain intact. But Sarah Mitchell's children would never know the full truth. The possibility haunted her. For the first time, Emma realized the decision wasn't really between comfort and discomfort. It was between two different losses. If she spoke, she could lose her family. If she stayed silent, someone else's family lost justice. Either way, something would be destroyed. That realization changed her. Not immediately, not dramatically. Slowly, like sunrise, one painful inch at a time. Meanwhile, the trial moved closer to its conclusion. And from the outside, Ethan Blackwell appeared to be winning. Legal analysts discussed the case on television. Most predicted victory for the defense. Several major witnesses had weakened. Important evidence appeared circumstantial. The company's attorneys seemed confident, very confident. News commentators began describing the lawsuit as emotional but legally fragile. Investors relaxed. Stock prices stabilized. Executives smiled again. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere reflected that confidence. The defense team looked comfortable, almost relieved. Each day that passed without a major revelation strengthened their position. And Ethan knew it. Everyone could see it. The tension that once followed him everywhere had started fading. His posture changed. His confidence returned. His smile returned. For the first time in months, he looked like the billionaire who believed he controlled outcomes, not the man worried about consequences. As the trial entered its final stage, most observers believed the result was becoming obvious. The plaintiff's attorneys appeared frustrated. The defense appeared prepared. The media began writing stories before the verdict even existed. Victory seemed close. Then came the final day. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Reporters lined the walls. Spectators filled every available seat. The atmosphere felt electric. Everyone sensed the trial was ending. Nobody realized the real story hadn't started yet. The proceedings moved forward. Witnesses finished testifying. Arguments concluded. Evidence presentations ended. One by one, loose ends were tied together. Then the courtroom fell quiet. I reviewed the case file before me, looked across the room, and asked a simple question. Is there any additional testimony? For a moment, nobody moved. The defense remained calm. The plaintiff remained seated. The spectators waited. Then a chair slowly slid backward, a sound so small most people barely noticed it. But every head turned. Emma Blackwell rose to her feet, and suddenly her father looked afraid again. For several seconds, nobody moved. The courtroom seemed frozen in place. Emma stood motionless beside her chair. Her father stared at her, confused at first, then concerned, then something else, something darker, because deep down, Ethan Blackwell knew exactly what she was carrying. He simply never believed she would use it. The silence stretched. Every reporter in the room turned toward her. Every attorney, every spectator. Even the court staff stopped moving. Emma slowly walked toward the witness stand. Each step seemed louder than the last. The sound of her shoes echoed across the room, not because they were loud, because nobody else was making a sound. Ethan's lead attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, the witness list has already been finalized. I looked toward Emma, then toward the attorney, then back toward Emma. What testimony would you like to provide? Her hands trembled slightly, not enough to stop her, just enough to reveal how difficult this moment truly was. For months, she had been fighting this battle alone. For months, she had hoped someone else would make the decision for her. Now there was nobody left, only her. And the truth, she swallowed hard, then spoke. I have evidence relevant to this case. The words landed like a thunderclap. Across the room, Ethan's face changed. The confidence vanished, not all at once, slowly, like a building beginning to crack. The attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, we have not reviewed this evidence. Another attorney stood, then another. Arguments erupted instantly. Procedures, rules, deadlines, technicalities. Lawyers often reach for procedure when they fear substance. I listened, then raised my hand. The room became quiet again. Approach the witness stand. Emma nodded. As she reached the stand, she removed something from her pocket. A phone. Still. Ordinary, the kind of object people carry every day. Yet in that moment it seemed heavier than any document in the courtroom, because everyone understood what it represented. Possibility, truth, consequences. The attorney turned toward Ethan, whispered urgently. Ethan never looked away from his daughter, not once. His eyes remained fixed on her, as if he could somehow stop what was coming, as if a father's stare could reverse time. Emma connected the phone to the courtroom display system. The screen at the front of the room illuminated. The sudden light seemed almost blinding. Every face turned toward it. Every eye focused on the same place, waiting. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Emma's breathing became visible. She looked at the screen, then at her father, then back at the screen. Finally, she opened the message thread. The first message appeared. Short, simple, familiar, dilemma. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Small, barely audible, but impossible to miss. The defense attorney immediately objected again. His voice sounded different now. More desperate, less confident. The objection barely registered. People weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at the screen. Emma scrolled downward. Another message appeared. Pay her. The courtroom grew even quieter. Then another. Make it disappear. Several reporters immediately began taking deuce. Faster. More urgently. The atmosphere changed. Everyone could feel it. Because these weren't rumors. These weren't theories. These were words documented, recorded, preserved. Emma continued. A fourth message appeared. We cannot let this reach investigators. This time the reaction was visible. One attorney lowered his head. Another removed his glasses. Someone in the audience gasped. Across the room, Ethan's shoulders dropped slightly. Just slightly. But enough. Enough to reveal the weight he was suddenly carrying. Emma kept scrolling. The next message appeared. I'd save the draft. Another. Keep this internal. Another. Delay the report. Another. We'll handle the witness. Every message seemed worse than the one before it. Every message removed another layer of doubt. Every message pushed the truth further into the light. The courtroom no longer resembled a courtroom. It felt like a dam breaking. Months of pressure, months of secrecy, months of questions, all collapsing at once. The plaintiff's attorneys looked stunned. The defense attorneys looked defeated. The reporters could barely keep up. And at the center of it, all stood Emma, crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, tears running down her face. Because this wasn't a victory. People often misunderstand moments like these. They imagine triumph, satisfaction, relief. But real truth rarely arrives that way. Truth often hurts everyone involved. Emma wasn't exposing an enemy. She was exposing her father, the man who taught her to ride a bicycle, the man who attended every birthday, the man who spent 27 years earning her trust. And now she was watching that trust collapse in front of an entire courtroom. I looked toward Ethan. For the first time since the trial began, tears filled his eyes as well. Not angry tears, not defiant tears. Something else. The look of a man finally realizing there was no strategy left. no legal argument, no public relations campaign, no amount of money capable of changing what had already happened. Because the truth had arrived, and once truth arrives, it becomes very difficult to send away. The room remained silent. Nobody celebrated. Nobody smiled. Nobody won. The truth simply stood there. Unavoidable, permanent, waiting to be acknowledged. The proceedings paused briefly while the evidence was reviewed. When court resumed, the atmosphere had completely changed. The questions were no longer about whether information had been hidden. The questions were about responsibility. Who knew? Who approved it? Who benefited from it? Who chose silence? The answers became increasingly clear. By the time closing arguments concluded, the outcome was no longer a mystery. The evidence spoke for itself. Several days later, the courtroom filled once more for the verdict. Every seat was occupied. Reporters crowded every available space. Outside, cameras lined the street. Inside, the silence felt almost sacred. I reviewed the evidence one final time. Then I began. This court recognizes the immense influence held by corporations and their leadership. The room remained silent. With influence comes responsibility. I looked toward Ethan. Not responsible to profits. Another pause. Not responsibility to public image. Another pause. Responsibility to truth. Nobody moved. The evidence demonstrates deliberate efforts to conceal information relevant to a workplace fatality investigation. I continued carefully. The evidence demonstrates a failure of corporate accountability. Another pause, and the evidence demonstrates that those failures contributed to denying a grieving family the transparency they deserved. Sarah Mitchell's family sat quietly in the front row, holding hands. Listening, waiting. The verdict was entered. Liability established. Damages awarded. Additional investigations recommended. The legal consequences were significant. The personal consequences would be even greater. When I finished speaking, nobody immediately reacted. The room simply sat there, absorbing what had happened. Then I noticed Ethan looking toward Emma, not with anger, not with hatred, not even with disappointment, with understanding, painful understanding, because for the first time he finally saw the situation clearly. His daughter had not betrayed him. He had betrayed himself. Every deleted report, every hidden conversation, every decision, every message, those choices belonged to him, not her. She had simply refused to carry them. Outside the courthouse, the world moved on. Headlines appeared. Analysts debated. Commentators argued. The public consumed another news cycle, as people always do. But inside one family, nothing would ever be the same. Emma lost more than most people realized. She lost access, influence, test, opportunities, relationships, an inheritance worth more money than most people could imagine. Some family members stopped speaking to her entirely. Others never forgave her. The price of truth can be extraordinarily high. Yet, despite everything she lost, one thing remained: integrity. And for Sarah Mitchell's children, something else remained. And waters, not perfect answers, not complete healing. Nothing could ever restore what they had lost, but they finally knew the truth. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive as celebration. Sometimes justice arrives as clarity, the clarity to see what happened, the courage to acknowledge it, and the willingness to accept its consequences. As I left the courtroom that day, one thought remained with me. Some people spend their entire lives protecting their reputation. But in the end, the truth doesn't care how rich you are. It only asks one question. When the moment came, did you tell it? The courtroom was completely silent when I returned to deliver the verdict. No whispers, no movement, no last-minute conversation between attorneys. The energy in the room had changed. Just days earlier, this courtroom had been filled with arguments, objections, legal strategies, and competing narratives. Now there was only one thing left: the truth. The evidence Emma Blackwell had revealed had shattered the foundation of the defense. not because the messages were emotional, not because they were shocking, because they were undeniable. There is a unique power in someone's own words. Witnesses can forget, memories can fade, opinions can change. But a message written in a private moment often reveals exactly what a person was thinking when nobody believed they would ever be exposed. And now those private thoughts belong to the courtroom. I looked across the room. Sarah Mitchell's family sat together in the front row. Her mother held a photograph tightly against her chest. Beside her sat Sarah's 2 children. The little boy who would never again hear his mother's voice. The little girl who would never again run into her mother's arms after school. No verdict could change that. No amount of money could change that. No legal victory could change that. Justice cannot bring people back. It can only tell the truth about why they were lost. Across the room sat Ethan Blackwell. For the first time since this trial began, he no longer looked like a billionaire. The expensive suit was still there. The lawyers were still there. The wealth was still there. But something else was gone. The certainty, the confidence, the belief that power could solve every problem. He sat quietly, staring at the table in front of him, not speaking, not moving, just waiting. I opened the case file one final time. Then I began. The purpose of this court is not to punish success. The room remained silent. Success is not a crime. I paused. Building a company is not a crime. Another pause. Creating wealth is not a crime. Several members of the jury nodded slightly. Then I continued. But when power is used to hide the truth, when influence is used to obstruct accountability, and when responsibility is sacrificed to protect reputation, this court has an obligation to act. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. The evidence presented demonstrates a deliberate pattern of concealment. I turned a page. The evidence demonstrates efforts to delay, suppress, and control information directly related to a workplace fatality investigation. Another page. The evidence further demonstrates that these actions were not isolated mistakes. The words seemed to echo through the room. They were decisions. I looked directly toward Ethan. Conscious decisions. The silence became heavier because everyone understood what that meant. Mistakes can be forgiven. Accidents can be understood, but decisions carry ownership, and ownership carries consequences. I continued reading the findings. The corporation would face substantial financial penalties. Additional investigations would proceed. Civil damages would be awarded to Sarah Mitchell's family. Independent oversight would be imposed. The consequences were significant. But strangely, none of that felt like the most important part. The most important part happened afterward, because when the verdict ended, nobody celebrated. Sarah's family cried quietly. Not tears of happiness, tears of relief. Relief that they were no longer being told their questions didn't matter. Relief that someone had finally listened. Relief that the truth had survived. Across the room, Ethan slowly lifted his head, and for the first time all day, he looked directly at Emma. The entire courtroom seemed to disappear around them. The lawyers disappeared. The reporters disappeared. The cameras disappeared. For one brief moment, there was only a father and a daughter. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Neither spoke, neither needed to, because both finally understood something that had taken months to reach. Emma had not destroyed her father. The messages had. The decisions had. The lies had. The cover-up had. She didn't betray him. She simply refused to betray the truth. And deep down, Ethan knew it. The realization seemed to break something inside him. Not in anger, not in rage, in regret. The kind of regret that arrives when a person finally sees the distance between who they believed they were and who they became. I have presided over many cases. Most involve people fighting each other. This one felt different because the greatest battle wasn't between two opposing sides. It was between truth and loyalty, and truth had won. But victory came at a cost. outside the courthouse. Reporters rushed to publish headlines. Television networks interrupted programming. Financial analysts discussed the impact. Investors reacted. The public debated. The story became national news. For Ethan Blackwell, the consequences continued long after the courtroom emptied. Board members resigned. Partnerships disappeared. Investigations expanded. The empire he spent decades building suddenly looked fragile. But the most painful loss wasn't financial. It was personal, because trust, once broken, is often harder to rebuild than wealth. Emma paid a price as well. People like to imagine truth-tellers walking away as heroes. Reality is usually more complicated. Some relatives stopped speaking to her. Family friends vanished. Business opportunities disappeared. She lost access to the life she had always known. She lost status. She lost influence. She lost an inheritance worth more money than most people could earn in multiple lifetimes. But there was one thing she kept. The one thing nobody could take from her, her integrity. Months later, Sarah Mitchell's children established a scholarship fund in their mother's name using part of the settlement. Students entered college because of it. Families received help because of it. A small piece of tragedy became something meaningful. Not enough, never enough, but something. And perhaps that is all justice can ever hope to achieve, not perfection, not reversal, not miracles. Only accountability, only truth, only the chance to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. As I think back on that case, one image remains clearer than all the others. Not the messages, not the verdict, not the headlines. A daughter standing alone in a courtroom, choosing honesty over comfort, choosing truth over inheritance, choosing integrity over protection. And that choice changed everything, because some people spend their entire lives protecting their reputation. But in the end, the truth doesn't care how rich you are. It only asks one question. When the moment came, did you tell it?